realized right before the podcast that I hadn't had coffee yet today because I've had a couple of different appointments. So I'm like, well, 4:00, I can still have coffee, right?
Well, you'll know tonight.
Yeah, exactly.
Welcome to the show, my friend. I'm so happy to have you on here recording. We haven't seen each other in quite a while.
Yeah,
but the time that we did see each other was very eventful. And in this episode, we're going to talk all about the pre-wedding stuff that led up to the day and kind of how that all unfolded. So if you could introduce yourself to everyone and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So my name is Danica McKinnon and I got married last year. So we got married June 11th, 2021. So we're coming up on a year here soon. And we live in Ottawa, and Laura-Anne was our lovely photographer. We brought her out for that and it was amazing. So yeah.
Yeah.
Should I say anything more? Do you want any more?
Yeah, that's great. We'll get to know you more as we chat.
Okay.
It was quite the whirlwind, and I'll get you to tell the story from the beginning. But yeah, before we started recording, we talked about how when you got engaged, we all thought the pandemic would be over by the time your wedding came around. Like we literally were talking. Yeah. Oh my gosh. We were like, it'll be done. And then and we all know how that went. So tell us about your engagement, who your now husband is, and you can start.
Yeah. So my husband's name is Matthew and he's from Surrey, BC. I'm originally from Alberta, but we met here in Ottawa and started dating in January 2020. And so just before the pandemic, it's funny, this is a little side tangent, but we recently went mini golfing on a date and we were like, wow, this is so fun. We could do date things because most of our relationship has been the pandemic. And so most of our dates have always been like, at home cooking or something like that. So it was fun to actually go out and do a date thing. But so we started dating in January 2020 and then we got engaged in July of 2020. And as you said, at the time, July 2020, we were like, yeah, the pandemic will be over by next year. It's fine. Do you want me to just tell our wedding planning story?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, let's go for it.
Yeah. So July 2020, we got engaged. We got engaged on the Feast of St. James. So July 25th. He's always been big in our relationship because we had when we first met, we bonded over the fact that we both walked the Camino de Santiago. So if anyone unfamiliar with that, it's a walk. It's like an 800-kilometer walk through Spain to the tomb of St. James in Santiago de Compostela. And anyway, so we bonded over that and he proposed on St. James's feast day. And at the time we're like, okay, the pandemic will hopefully be done by next year. So we'll get married. We picked June 11th as our wedding date because it was really meaningful to both of us, but especially to Matthew. Just like some brief history that I'm sure he wouldn't mind me sharing. He had cancer when he was 16 and June 11th was the day he was like properly diagnosed and had a major brain surgery that day. And then it was also, he finished his Camino around June 11th. And then a few years before he moved to Ottawa, he had cancer again. And that was the day that they discovered it and had a surgery and everything is fine. He's healthy and everything is fine. But the day was just really meaningful. And so we wanted to get married on that day. So that's the day we picked. We started planning our wedding that summer. We booked a venue. We booked a caterer. We booked the church. We booked you. And, you just doing whatever everyone does in their wedding. All the things that you would normally do in your wedding planning. He was working. I was studying full-time and working. And as the year went on, obviously like things got a little worse in the fall, and my husband's roommate. And so my roommate and my husband's roommate were also getting married, and they were getting married a week before us, and he works in healthcare. And so he was like, yeah, there'll be a vaccine by that. Like there should be a vaccine by that point. At that time, they were like not anticipating there to be like, we would mostly be out of it by June, which is also why they picked their wedding date at that time. And so we got to journey with them throughout the year. And so in December, January, he was still like, no, everything will be fine by like May, June. But in January, the venue we had booked, they're like, it was like this gorgeous outdoor farm, and they didn't require a deposit, which was nice because then we didn't have to like lose anything. But the summer of 2020, they hadn't prepped their venue or done any weddings because for them, it wasn't worth it with so many people canceling their weddings. And they weren't sure if they would do it the following summer if the situation was the same. They told us they'd let us know January, February. So January, February comes around, things aren't looking so good. It's like here in Ontario, we were in a stay-at-home order in January last year. And so we were basically like, it's likely that they're going to cancel their venue. We better look for a venue now, because if we wait another month or two, it might get really tough to find a venue. And so we canceled that venue, which also means that we had to cancel our caterer. And then we looked for another venue. We booked another venue, put another deposit down, booked another caterer. And then Ontario kind of had like a sweet spot where things were okay from about mid-February to Easter. And at that point, things started getting bad around Easter, and we were still hopeful. But at this point, we had also realized, like, okay, at max, we're going to be allowed to have 50 guests. And so my husband has a large family, he's the youngest of 6 siblings. So, and he's got a lot of nieces and nephews. So we're like, that's going to take up a chunk of the guest list. Obviously, my family, our bridal party. And then that was pretty much going to be it. It was a few extra people, which actually made it easier to make a smaller guest list than a larger guest list. And then near the end of April, the province of Ontario put in another stay-at-home order. And so we were desperately hoping that things would get better. But definitely like throughout the year, as the year was progressing, I was kind of realizing, like, I don't know if my wedding is going to look like how I've always, dreamed or thought that my wedding would look like. And so I had a lot of sad moments throughout the year of like letting go of, I come from a large extended family. Matthew has a large extended family. Here in Ottawa, we have an amazing Catholic community, and a lot of the weddings around here are like big and everyone's there and involved and stuff. So letting go of that idea of like our big community, like wedding, was a big thing. Then as our wedding day drew closer, like part of the restrictions were like they had limited religious services to only 10 people, including like your priest. And so pretty much up until just before our wedding, it was only going to be 10 people. And so we had to make some really tough decisions in May to like let go. We had to cancel our venue. We lost our deposit. We had to cancel the caterer again. And most of Matthew's siblings ended up not being able to, like, not most, all of them ended up not being able to come. At least half of our wedding party, we both had a few international friends that were like, my maid of honor was international, Matthew's best man was international. And obviously at that time they couldn't even come in the country. So they couldn't come. Almost all of Matthew's groomsmen couldn't come. So he had to ask a few more people. And my sister decided to come anyways and just stand outside the church if she had to. So basically what it boiled down to, the wedding that we ended up planning was we would be allowed 10 people in the church, which meant it would be the two of us, both of our parents, our priest, you, our photographer, our musician, and then the guy who was doing the live stream. And then we were allowed, at this point, we were still allowed gatherings of 5 people outside. So we were going to do, some friends of ours helped us get creative where you could do like rotating groups of visitors essentially for a reception. So that's what we planned. And we were going to do it in my little backyard. I lived in like a residential area of the city. So not even the suburb, like an actual city area. And we planned to just have it in the backyard of this house that I had been living at for a few years. So, and then Ontario released their opening plan, and stage 1 was supposed to not include religious services, but it would allow groups of 10 to gather outside, which means that our little gatherings could be bigger. But religious services weren't supposed to be added until stage 2. And then, so we were getting married on the Friday. Our parents arrive on the weekend. My sister arrives on the weekend. And on Monday, the Ontario government, I had been praying the month leading up to a couple different things. The month leading up to our wedding, I had been praying what I was calling my moving mountains prayers, like prayers that prayers for things that I'm like, this feels like a gigantic mountain. I have absolutely zero control over it. But if it's going to change, God's going to do it, and he can move this mountain. And one of the mountains I was praying that would be moved was that Ontario would enter stage 1 a few days early, because they were supposed to enter it June 14th and we were getting married June 11th. And I'm like, if they could just allow gatherings of 10 people by June 11th, then we could gather and our dinner wouldn't be illegal. And so, and my friends of mine were like, well, you're not paying for a venue. So if you get a bylaw ticket, it's just essentially your venue cost. And we were like, yeah, but I'd still prefer not to get a bylaw ticket on our wedding day. So the Monday before our wedding, Ontario announced that they were entering stage 1 3 days early. So on our wedding day, and allowing gatherings of up to 10 people. And they amended it to allow religious services at 15% capacity, which meant that we could have 80 people in the church. So that was like a huge, huge thing, because by that point we had already let go of like any concept of having people at our wedding. So the last 4 days before our wedding, we sort of replanned everything, had to like re-invite people. And yeah, the community was amazing, because obviously we got married on a Friday, which is a work day. And 4 days before the wedding, we were like, do you want to come to our wedding on Friday afternoon? And so many people were able to make it. So that was really awesome. So yeah, the other thing that was huge in our wedding, do you want me to jump into the surrender part?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the other thing that was huge for me in our wedding was, as things were getting worse and not appearing to get any better, like my mom had originally told me about the Surrender Novena, and I was like, that's nice. But she had told me about it like several months before our wedding. She had been praying it, and I didn't really think twice about it. And then about a month and a half before our wedding, when the stay-at-home order was in place and things weren't getting any better, my spiritual director also recommended it. And so I started praying the Surrender Novena just like back to back, just like I'd finish it and then I'd just restart. And it was amazing. Like, I would say it made a massive difference for me personally on our wedding day. Because I look back at our wedding day and I'm like, okay, obviously, I mean, you were there. It was, it was really simple. We had our parents like resodded the lawn for us like 4 days before the wedding so that it wasn't gross. We had friends come and do the gardens for us a couple weeks before so that the gardens be nice. My boss lent me his gazebo so that we have something nice in our backyard. We had neighbors come together to like give us chairs and tables. My spiritual director gave me all of her like fine china. We ordered Italian takeout for dinner. And yeah, so it was like pretty like imperfect in so many ways, but it was just like the most beautiful day of my whole life. And everyone, or well, lots of people before our wedding day would say like, yeah, like your wedding day is going to be amazing and perfect. And you're just going to be so like peaceful and like enjoy it. And it was really, really hard to believe them. Both Matthew and I were like, yeah, like that's kind of rich because you're not in our situation, you know? And especially people who like had not experienced that before, who kind of like got the weddings they want. They're like, it's going to be so great. And you're like, yeah, but you didn't have to sacrifice all these things that we have to sacrifice. And so for me, like, I know like Matthew's a super positive person naturally. And so he was able to like be a little bit more like the hardest part for him was that his siblings wouldn't be able to be there. And whereas like for me, that was hard, but also everything else. And so he was like relatively positive most of the way along. And for me, praying the Surrender Novena, like I knew that if I didn't grieve the things that I was disappointed about, I didn't want to grieve them on my wedding day and be disappointed on our wedding day. Like this is like your one and only wedding day. I wanted to like be present, and like there's obviously so much grace available in the sacrament that day, and I wanted to be there and like experience what God had for us, and not just like pine over the things that couldn't happen, you know? So there were several times leading up to the wedding, especially in the month and a half prior when we were in a lockdown, of like lots of tears and like letting go and grieving the things that couldn't have, but praying this novena and like really praying that like, okay, Lord, like you have called us to the sacrament. And if anything, that this journey has taught us, it's convicted us that this is definitely where you're calling us, because we're choosing this regardless of the situation. And like, I just believe that you have grace available. So you can make the day as beautiful as you want, you know, and like really praying for the grace to be present that day. And, yeah, God came through in spades, like in ways like never, ever, ever could have imagined. Like I actually look back now and I'd be like, man, I wish everyone could have experienced the like surrender that we had to that day, because it was like so beautiful. And so like, we really got to be present with like a small group of people and like some of our dearest loved ones. And we got to do things, essentially let go of all the expectations of what a wedding should be like, and just be present in the day. And it was just, yeah, the most beautiful. And I'm someone who's like naturally more of a perfectionist. I get awkward really fast by embarrassing things. Like, and when our wedding mass started, the priest's microphone didn't work. And normally if that happened in a Sunday mass, I'd be like, oh no, someone's got to fix the priest's mic, you know? But on our wedding day, I was like, whatever, I can hear him. It's fine. And so, yeah, like I just look back and be like, everything I look back and be like, it was perfect in all its like smallness and imperfection and simplicity. And I really contributed that to the novena that I've been praying, and like God coming through. And just like there's grace when we actually surrender. Imagine that.
Yeah, imagine that.
So
yeah, that's
beautiful. That's the story.
Yeah. There's just so much. Yeah. The going from, I mean, the majority of your relationship being post March 2020 and the difference that makes for getting to know each other, because it's more conversation than activity based.
Yeah.
And that's interesting that was the theme throughout, because it's not like we got out of the pandemic before you got married, right? I mean, obviously you've just told this crazy story, but that it's always been this choice to communicate and to learn to do that. I'm not saying that was like easy, but learning to do that in the way that each other needed, because it was imperative that you actually talked about like big things and small things. Yeah. So maybe share a little bit more about what it was like talking with Matthew about these things. I mean, specifically about like your engagement and the dreams and hopes that you both had for your wedding, but that from your perspective as the bride dealing with giving things up and communicating that to your fiance.
When we first started wedding planning, we actually read a couple of your blogs that we found really helpful. There was one I remember that was like, you had suggested to like pick two words that kind of like two things that kind of encompass the theme or the feeling that you want for your wedding day. So that was one of the first things that we had did after we got engaged, and just talking about our expectations and like what are our top priorities for the wedding day. So we were really clear on that from the beginning. And I would say those things actually helped guide some of the decisions, especially as like it went on and we would have to like sacrifice more. I think that I wish I could remember. I think the two words that we said were like elegant, but casual or something along those lines. And so, which it's funny because I look back on our wedding day and I'm like, the backyard that we decorated was really beautiful and elegant, but it was also super casual, you know?
Totally.
So God kind of like helped us still see that through.
Yeah.
But I think, when you're planning a wedding during COVID, especially at that time, it really makes you prioritize. Like you just have no choice but to prioritize. And when you come together as two different people, sometimes you have different priorities. So you got to figure that out. And especially as things had to be cut left, right, and center, like talking about like, okay, so we have X amount in our budget. We still want to make this wedding beautiful. What's our priority and where we want to spend it? And what's our actual priorities? And like, okay, if we have to give up everything, what's like the most important? And actually, like, I'd say like the biggest thing as far as communicating, actually two things. I'd say two things. Learning, well, this is maybe more, I don't know. I'm just going to start listing them.
Yeah, you start listing and we'll make a list after.
Learning to like be there for each other in the disappointment, because I think that was something that Matthew had to learn, because he's so positive. He was like, well, okay, we'll just adapt and be fine. And I'm like, no, if I don't like really feel the disappointment right now, then I'm going to feel it later. And I don't want to feel it. Like, I don't want to hang on to that baggage. Like, I actually need to grieve it and then I can move on and then I will be fine, but I need to grieve it now. And so like learning to, be there for each other and how we each processed the disappointment, I think was big. And the stress of like dealing with it all. Also, it really convicted us of our call to marriage as well. Because I know before we were engaged, like I flip-flopped a ton. He was like a lot more steady in our call to engage or in call to engagement. But after we got engaged and after like all these things started like being pulled away from us, it's like, okay, are you actually doing this for the right reasons? It really like purified, I guess, that call and convicted us. I think there was a time it was probably about a year ago around now. It was early May and I think the government had probably just extended the lockdown for another couple of weeks. And we had this moment where like, your family's not coming, nothing, we're going to have to cancel everything. Do we want to postpone this and like wait a month or two when they say things will be better in July and August? But like for us, it like really convicted us of like, no, this is like a sacrament. And as much as we want a like party with our family and friends, we want the sacrament more. And there's like, this is why we're doing this, And so I think that was really, really big.
And that's
and just
interesting one because for some people, that would have been absolutely the like, no, we shouldn't. Everything's being shut down. So that's a sign that we shouldn't go ahead. And just to be even more clear, for some people, when things are blocked, that is the Lord redirecting you. Totally. I don't want that for someone to be like our caterer backed out on us. Like that means we shouldn't get married. Probably not. I mean, you should get married still, but that it is down to the two of you to really get very honest and with yourselves and then with each other, like with yourself, with the Lord, with each other, so that you were like, yeah, this is a purifying thing to make us better, for our desire for marriage to be purified and to be like rightly ordered versus, for some people, that's what the conclusion was for you guys. But for some people, that purifying will lead you to the heart of the matter, which is where God really wants to speak to you about your next step, and that it's so tailored to you individually. But yeah, to see that there's been, and to know you guys a little bit more than we can maybe get into on the podcast, but that there's been like the deep stuff where it has like required radical honesty, that to know that, yeah, this is hard, but we know this is it. Yeah. There's like a conviction. I like that you're saying radical honesty. I think that's like really what it boils down to, is like, yeah, we had to get very honest about like what we were doing and like why we were doing it, and like make a decision if that was the right thing, and like pay attention to what God was saying to us in that moment. And it's going to be a different decision for other people in other circumstances. So yeah. But I would say the communication it taught us has served us quite well in marriage, so that would be the other grace as well, just like because of the amount of things we had to communicate about and constantly adapt to. It's taught us how to adapt better to like changes in marriage. And we've gone through a lot of change in this past year. And so like it served us. There was so much grace available. So, and I think it very much depended to, our faith always depends on how we respond to God's grace as well. It's always there for the taking, but if we don't respond, then we don't benefit. So, yeah. Thanks be to God, we had the grace to respond. Absolutely. Yeah. And your wedding day was truly so like elegant and casual. Absolutely. That is the perfect words to describe how it was, because it, even in like how you guys carried yourselves throughout the day, I think I would describe it as that, where there was this, because in my mind, elegance has like a lightness to it. And to see you guys knowing that you were very serious about entering into marriage, but seeing how lighthearted you were on that day. Obviously is very much grace and you accepting that, but to see that way that you carried yourselves and we're just so, I mean, elegant really is an accurate word, but then to be so, that the casualness, I mean, your wedding was casual, it was in a backyard, but, and like you took
my
your
little
shoes
tiny
off,
city backyard. Yeah.
like with the nicest grass around.
Yeah.
Props to the parents. Oh my gosh, it was really nice. But yeah, that there was just this beauty and like effortlessness in how, I mean, not obviously effortlessness in that you had surrendered it all. Not that it didn't take a lot of effort to get there.
Yeah. But that's like the paradox in that, like, there was so much effort to get there, but then there's like, God is generous in spades, you know, and that was like beyond, like, we expected to be happy on our wedding day, obviously, but that was just beyond anything that we could have expected given the circumstances, you know? And I mean, honestly, both of us wanted like a big like wedding, but I think the fact that we had this small, tiny wedding, we were actually like, we had so much more energy. We were able to like just enjoy the day more. And I hear from other people like, hey, you forget to eat on your wedding day, or you like spend your whole day, like you spend 2 minutes talking to each person and you don't really get to like talk to them. Like we didn't get that experience because of the circumstances, we were able to like really dive in and be present on like each aspect of our wedding day, which was a beautiful grace. So little, like, I feel like this is like a tiny victory story or like a little shout out from God. And you were there for it, but to everyone listening, like Matthew, there's a park in Ottawa called Major Hill Park. It's behind the Chateau Laurier, which is the Fairmont Hotel. It looks like a castle, and it's right next to the Parliament buildings, and it kind of looks out over the river. And so that's where we had our first date. We had gone for a coffee and walked around the park. It's where Matthew proposed, and then we wanted to do golden hour photos in the park on our wedding day, and then we stayed at the hotel that night. But so this was like I said, this was the very first day that Ontario was allowing gatherings of 10 or more. So the park was actually full of a lot of like people that were finally allowed to gather. And so when we got out and got to the park, there we were in our wedding clothes, and we were like slightly behind. We were like trying to maximize our time with the golden hour light that we had. And we were like kind of booking it across the middle of the park to get to the spot where Matthew had proposed. And the whole park just started cheering for us. And that was like a really, really cool moment. It felt like a victory of love and light over the past like 2 months of darkness that we had all been in, you know? And so that was a really cool way to like end our wedding day. I think it was the background on my phone for a long time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that was truly like, it was like a movie, honestly, where
it was cool.
Like people, like some people that were closest were like, oh yeah, yeah. And then all of a sudden the park is just like erupting in noise because they realized that there's a bride and groom walking through. And I was like it was just loud, and like it was just that kind of contagious joy that people were like, something good is happening finally. And
it was
to be
cool.
like a
it was like a
visible
witness
sign
of goodness.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
I'd love to know, what was it like when your mom had mentioned this Surrender Novena, and then your spiritual director had told you you should probably do this. What would you describe the state of your heart before your spiritual director was like, yeah, you should do this? And then as time went on, doing the novena back to back to back.
Yeah. So I would say this time last year, which is probably around when I started praying it, like end of April, beginning of May, I was like devastated and like desperate. At this point, there was still like a chance that like maybe Ontario would end their lockdown before the end of May. But I was also like very aware, given like the track record of the way things were going, that like there's a very good chance it won't change, you know? And so I was very much grappling with the reality of like, we're going to have to let go of more stuff, you know, more sacrifices to be made. And I think there was a lot of fear of like at that time, I think Matthew's family was kind of up in the air of whether they were able to come. Several of my bridesmaids at that point were like, I can't come. And Matthew's groomsmen. So like every like, just like grappling with like, how do you process this thing that you've been waiting for like your whole life, especially as a woman, like many of us look forward to this day forever. And this is like the one and only time it's going to happen. And this is the scenario we're in, you know, like I can't do anything to change this scenario, but somehow this is the scenario in. Actually, I feel like I had a very like, I think, is it what they call pathetic fallacy, when like the environment mirrors how you're feeling, or like, you know, in literature like that.
Yeah.
There was like this one day where it was raining and like a little bit cold, and I just had like a full out like sobbing down. And I remember like making myself a cup of tea and like sitting out on my porch, and it's like pouring rain. I'm like my like wool sweater, sobbing to myself, and like Matthew just let me like grieve it, you know. And I needed that moment. Looking back, I'm like, I needed that moment, because that was my moment of like total grief, and just like feeling the weight of like all the sadness of it. And I think at that time too, I was like, this is like, I'm human. This is how I'm feeling. And I need help to like not feel this way, you know, and moving forward. And I don't want to just like sweep these feelings under the rug, and I don't want to live in them or like wallow in them forever. I want to feel them, but I don't want to stay this way. I'm marrying the love of my life in like a month and a half. And so like, this should be a happy time. And so I want to be excited and happy and grateful. And so I just like need God's help to get there, you know? And so I think when I started the Surrender Novena, like there's some lines in the Surrender Novena that are like pretty challenging, in the sense that it's like, God, you take care of it, or God, it's almost like God speaking. If you've never done it, it's like God, words from God's to you, like as you're praying it. And it's like, you're worrying about too many things, like you're worrying about earthly things, et cetera, et cetera. I can't remember all the words right now, but like convicting things. And when I first started praying it, it was more like, I want to mean these things. I don't mean them right now, but I want to mean these things. And so I just like trusting that God like would take my heart there. And I feel like there's a few times in life where like oftentimes we pray and we say things, but and sometimes we forget when we pray, I think, that there's actually another person there, you know, like God is another being. We don't actually control our prayer. Like when we go to pray, we don't control the outcomes or what God says. And this is like one of those moments where the reality hit of like, no, there's someone else there, and I can't control how they respond to me. And I'm just going to have to like ask and pray and like understand and trust that God is hearing and listening. And he actually cares about these things that are like deep on my heart. And he cares about the little things, and he like will respond to this, you know? So, and then gradually it changed. Like I wouldn't even say, I think I hit a point maybe about 3 weeks before our wedding day where I was like, okay, I'm done being sad. It's 3 weeks before my wedding day. I want to be excited at this point. And so I think that was certainly a changing, like a turning point. And I don't know if I would have reached it had I not been praying. And then again, obviously on our wedding day, like to be able to enjoy that week. But I feel like the week leading up to our wedding day, I kind of forgot we were in a pandemic, which was nice. So yeah. I don't know if that answered the question. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it did. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, to see that it's not that it can't be like a spontaneous change of heart, but that it can sort of, you know, when you're talking about the few weeks before your wedding that you were like, yeah, I feel like I can actually make the decision to now be excited, but that was like weeks of like working on that, of letting the Lord work on that in your heart, so that it wasn't just like, I don't know if you would have 3 weeks before your wedding been like, okay, yeah, I'm excited. If you hadn't been actively being like, okay, it's not in my hands. I'm letting it. Yeah. I'm giving it all over.
It's amazing. Like, oh, sorry. Someone at the door. Yeah. It's amazing how much we try and control things, you know, until you realize when you're in a situation where you're truly, truly not in control. Mm-hmm. And then you recognize like just how badly we try and control things.
I would be interested to hear what you would say to brides planning their weddings now, you know, or even in the future, because who knows who will listen to this when, but, you know, out of the pandemic life. Like, you know, even because
please God.
Yeah. Let's let it be over. Because I feel like we're never really in control, but the pandemic really showed us that. Mm-hmm. Right. And so and I'm sure the brides pre 2020 would also attest to that there's stuff just happens that you are not in control of. So that's a thing that happens with weddings anyway.
Yeah. Pandemic or not.
Yeah. But because your experience was dramatic, like a dramatic presentation of not being in control, what would you say to brides now as they're planning their wedding?
So I would recommend that novena. Like, I think there's a lot of grace to be had. And yeah, like you said, like things are not going to go your way on your wedding day. Like there's going to be things either like in your wedding planning that maybe things that you want, but you can't afford, or family things that come up, or like disagreements between you and your like fiance. There's going to be things that you're going to have to let go of and sacrifice. And the novena just helps you let it go. And I've read stories about brides that were like disappointed on their wedding day of like, you know, things didn't happen the way they wanted it to, or they wish they had more time than this. And I look back at our wedding day and I'm like, did it go perfectly? No. But there are things that we might do a little bit differently if we could do it all over again. Yeah. Like I would have given ourselves a lot more time for all the things because we were rushed a bit. But I look back and I'm like, okay, I know that this novena I prayed, like we experienced it the way God wanted us to. And I'm like so content in that and peaceful in that. And so I would recommend, I mean, I assume that most people listening to your show are Catholic and they're like interested in praying something like a novena, but I would really recommend that. The other thing that I was thinking about is I feel like our experience taught us that your wedding doesn't have to like look like everyone thinks it should be, you know? And I remember reading that in your blog. I feel like you're really good at recommending that, like picking the certain things. And I know like your own wedding wasn't like maybe like, you know, you guys had pizza, which isn't necessarily like what other people like would do, but it's like, you don't have to do the things that everyone says you have to do, you know? And being more true to like who you are and who your fiance is, who God has called you to be as a couple, and like what he's put on your heart. And maybe that's like a blessing of the pandemic that I hope continues past the pandemic, is that the pandemic did that for most weddings where like people couldn't do like the usual. And I hope people have the freedom going forward to just think a little bit differently if they want. Like if you still want the usual, then that's great. You know, we all still like those weddings, but having the freedom to I guess be more true to who you are and what God's calling you to be, and not just doing things because that's what weddings are supposed to be doing. So
yeah, the choice, making an active choice as opposed to this is just how things are done. So that's how we're going to do them. Because if you want the big reception with the dancing and everything, you still need to choose that. Yeah. You can't just be like, oh, well, that's just what a wedding is. No, you have to decide this is what our wedding is going to be. Yeah. And I agree with you. I really hope that people, having seen maybe their friends go through pandemic weddings, or just in general, seeing weddings that have had to change, because if you had a pandemic wedding still, you chose that. You chose to do it that way. You didn't have to. There are definitely people who, I mean, summer 2022 is supposedly the most wedding crazy summer since like 1986 or something. Like just insane number of weddings are happening. And it's interesting because like in my experience, I had similar number of weddings in 2020 and 2021 because Catholics get married. It's not, you know, you probably like, I know people that they literally only had a ceremony. Yeah. They just got married. Like they literally just got married and they didn't get to have a party, which is that's a whole different kind of a conversation.
Yeah, that's another level of surrender.
Totally. And so for people you need to choose what your wedding is going to be like, and to have that freedom to do it differently and to do it small, that you don't have to invite everybody. Like that's just, I mean, I say a lot about that stuff all the time, but
no, I agree. Like, I actually loved the fact that our wedding was small. On one hand, it was like sad to have certain people not there, but like having it small, like we got really good quality time with the people we loved. And by the time we got to our hotel room that night, we weren't tired. Like, you know, actually, I mean, we were relatively tired. And I remember commenting, holy man, I can't imagine if we had had a reception with a big dance. Can you imagine how exhausted we would be right now? You know?
Yeah.
But it was so special to have such a small wedding and like have time, like intimate time with your like closest family and friends. So maybe that goes against a lot of the conventional wisdom, especially in some of our Catholic circles, but it was amazing. So consider it. I'd recommend that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Especially for any introverts. I had a number of introvert couples in the past couple of years that they were going to do big weddings because they were, you know, introverts doesn't mean that you don't want to see people, but to have your energy be tapped out by a lot of people is more what happens. But they ended up having like a tiny wedding and they were thrilled.
And like you enjoy it so much more, right?
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's great. I will link the novena in the notes for people to get that resource so they can start praying it as wedding season is quickly upon us.
Yeah, approaching. Yeah.
And I'll probably link your wedding from my blog post about it so people can see how tiny it was.
Yeah. Go take a look at our tiny little city backyard.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah.
It was great. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Danica. I really appreciate you sharing all about your engagement and surrender and how that affected the planning and your heart preparing for marriage. So thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate the chance to talk about it. I will gush to anyone who asks. So I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah.